Everyone knows Jesus turned water into wine. But almost no one notices the two sentences he spoke before the miracle. Hidden inside those words is a message about his death, the cross, and the entire Gospel of John. Once you see it, you'll never read the wedding at Cana the same way again. A servant is standing in a courtyard in a small Galilean village holding an empty jar, and he already knows what it means. The wine is gone, not running low, gone, and the feast still has days left to run. You have to understand what that meant in a village like this one. A first-century Jewish wedding was not an afternoon, it was a week. Family walked in from other towns, neighbors closed their shops. The bridegroom and his bride were treated like royalty for 7 straight days, and the family footed the bill for all of it. Hospitality was not a nice gesture in that culture. It was the measure of a man. Running out of wine in the middle of your own wedding feast was not an inconvenience. It was a story the village would still be telling about your family 20 years later. So the servant is standing there with an empty jar, and somewhere in that courtyard, a young couple is about to be humiliated on the best week of their lives. And then a woman finds her son and says 4 words to him. And what happens next has been painted, preached, and reduced to a Sunday school flannel graph for 2,000 years. Jesus turned water into wine. Nice miracle, kind gesture, party saved. But that is not why John put it in his gospel. John is the most deliberate writer in the New Testament. He tells us plainly near the end of his book that he selected what he selected on purpose, that he left out far more than he included, and that everything he did include was chosen to prove one specific claim. So, when the very first public act he records is a miracle at a village wedding involving 6 stone jars that existed for exactly one purpose, on a day he takes the trouble to number for us, you can be certain of one thing. Not one detail in this account is decoration, which brings us to the part that gets skipped every single time. Before Jesus touched a drop of that water, before he gave one instruction to one servant, he said 2 things to his mother. 2 short statements. In most English Bibles, they take up less than a single verse. Readers slide past them or quietly wince at them because in English they sound cold. They sound like a man brushing off the woman who raised him. They are not cold. They are the key to the entire miracle. Because when you take those 2 statements back into the Greek and then trace those exact words through the rest of the Gospel of John, you find that this is not primarily a story about wine at a party. It is the moment Jesus tells his mother, in language she could not possibly have understood yet, that the second she asks him to step forward in public, she is starting a clock that ends at a cross. Jesus' words to his mother reveal far more than a simple conversation. They introduce a mission that reaches far beyond a wedding celebration. When Mary informed him that the wine had run out, Jesus replied, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." At first glance, those words seem distant, but in their original language they carry a much deeper meaning. The Greek word translated as woman was a respectful form of address, not an insult. Jesus used the same expression when speaking to other women throughout his ministry. Yet there is something unusual about using it for his own mother. Throughout John's Gospel, Jesus never once calls Mary mother. Instead, he consistently addresses her as woman. John is intentionally drawing the reader's attention to something much greater than their family relationship. The next statement is even more remarkable. The phrase often translated as, "What does this have to do with me?" comes from an ancient Hebrew expression that appears many times throughout Scripture. Rather than expressing anger, it marks a difference between 2 missions. Mary was concerned about a wedding running out of wine. Jesus was thinking about the mission his Father had given him. Then comes the sentence that unlocks the entire story. My hour has not yet come. In John's Gospel, the word hour never refers simply to time on a clock. It always points toward one climactic event: Jesus' suffering, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and his return to the Father. Later in John chapter 7, people try to arrest Jesus, but they cannot because his hour had not yet come. The same thing happens again in chapter 8. Everything changes in chapter 12. When Greeks arrive seeking Jesus, he announces, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Only a few verses later, he admits that his soul is troubled because this very hour is approaching. Yet he also declares that this is the reason he came into the world. By the time we reach the Last Supper in John chapter 13, Jesus knows that his hour has come. Then in chapter 17, just before his arrest, he prays, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son." When we follow John's pattern, Jesus' reply at Cana suddenly takes on a completely different meaning. Mary mentions a shortage of wine, but Jesus responds by pointing toward the cross. The moment he begins revealing himself publicly, every step will move him closer to his sacrifice. Mary may have been asking him to rescue a wedding feast, but Jesus already knew that rescuing humanity would cost him his life. Even after hearing those words, Mary simply turns to the servants and says, "Whatever he tells you, do it." These become the final recorded words of Mary in the New Testament. Rather than drawing attention to herself, she points everyone toward her Son. Jesus then looks around the courtyard and chooses 6 large stone jars. These were not ordinary containers. They were used for Jewish ceremonial purification. Archaeological discoveries across Galilee have confirmed that these heavy stone vessels were commonly used because, unlike clay pots, they were considered ritually clean. Each jar held an enormous amount of water, and together they contained well over 100 gallons. Instead of creating brand new containers, Jesus deliberately chose these purification jars. Soon, they would hold something entirely different. He instructed the servants, "Fill the jars with water." They filled every one of them to the very top. Then Jesus simply told them to draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. No dramatic gesture, no spoken prayer, no visible act. Somewhere between filling the jars and pouring the cup, the water had become wine. When the master of the banquet tasted the wine, he had no idea where it had come from. Only the servants who had filled the jars with water knew the truth. Calling the bridegroom over, he said, "Most people serve the best wine first and bring out the cheaper wine later. But you have saved the best until now." John includes this detail for a reason. The earthly bridegroom received praise for something he never did. Yet the true bridegroom stood quietly in the background without seeking recognition. Later in John's Gospel, John the Baptist declares, "The bride belongs to the bridegroom." The real bridegroom was Jesus himself. This miracle was never just about saving a wedding celebration. Throughout the Old Testament, overflowing wine is a symbol of the coming Messiah and God's future kingdom. The prophets spoke of a day when the mountains would overflow with wine and God's people would celebrate his salvation. To Jewish readers, abundant wine pointed to the arrival of God's promised age. John also avoids calling this event a miracle. Instead, he calls it a sign. A sign is meant to point beyond itself to a greater reality. So what was this sign pointing toward? The water inside the purification jars represented the old system of ceremonial cleansing. Jesus transformed that water into wine, a picture of something entirely new. Later, during the Last Supper, he would lift a cup of wine and say that it represented his blood of the new covenant, poured out for the forgiveness of sins. The message becomes clear. The old covenant pointed forward. Jesus came to fulfill it. Then John brings us back to the words spoken at Cana. At the wedding, Jesus said, "My hour has not yet come." Years later, that hour finally arrived. As Jesus hung on the cross, his mother stood nearby. Once again, he looked at her and said, "Woman." The same title he had used at Cana appears again at Calvary. John intentionally connects these two moments. The wedding marks the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. The cross marks its completion. Everything in between moves toward that appointed hour. John records one more remarkable detail. After Jesus died, a soldier pierced his side, and blood and water flowed out. Think about the pattern. At Cana, water became wine. At Calvary, blood and water flowed from Christ. The first sign quietly pointed toward the final sacrifice. So what does this mean for us today? Sometimes God answers our prayers with, "Not yet." That doesn't always mean no. Jesus knew exactly what beginning his public ministry would eventually cost him. Even so, he chose the path that led to the cross because his love was greater than the price he would pay. There's another lesson hidden in those 6 stone jars. Jesus didn't throw them away. He transformed what already existed and filled empty vessels with something completely new. He still works that way today. He takes ordinary lives, empty hearts, broken people, and gives them new purpose through his grace. Finally, remember the words spoken by the master of the feast. "You have kept the best wine until now." The world offers its best first and leaves people with emptiness in the end. Jesus does the opposite. With him, the greatest hope is still ahead. The wedding at Cana was never simply about turning water into wine. It was the opening sign that pointed to the cross, the new covenant, and the glory of the one who would give his life so that the world could truly be made new.